His name was Jim. He was the youth director at the Presbyterian Church. I grew up somewhat sheltered, but not exactly naive. Realizing I was gay was a shock, but I didn't beat myself up. I put it on a shelf in my mind. I told myself I would deal with it later. There were crushes. I was a teenage boy, a couple of rock stars, a few movie stars, the captain of the football team, but that was just lust. Then I met Jim. He had steel blue eyes and a goofy smile. He called me Raphael because that was the name of an artist and an angel. I was an artist. He thought I was an angel. I would ride my bike to the church to see him. When I tapped on his door, he would look up from whatever he was doing and smile and say, "Raphael, come in. Now smile and make the sun shine for me." I was sure he was gay. Straight men don't talk like that. I spent so many hot summer nights dreaming of the day that I would go to visit and he would tell me to go home and pack my bags, that he would be around in 2 hours to pick me up. I would put my suitcases in the trunk of his beat-up white sedan, and we would head west to San Francisco. Even I knew that's where gay men went to live happily ever after. Jim never said that. He never even kissed me. He understood, even if I didn't, how much we had to lose, but he taught me how to love. My first time was with David. I met him at a New Age meditation group, as close to Sunday school as I ever got by then. He was cute enough. We went on 6 dates before we had sex. It was all so sweet and so proper, so respectable, and the sex was so profoundly disappointing. After we were done, I kept thinking, this is sex? Really? This is what everybody's so obsessed with? I was too inexperienced to realize the problem was my partner. I was lucky he was a psycho. He drove me to dump him. But David taught me to never settle for less. A year later, I met Raven Wolfdancer. I was at a mutual friend's New Year's Eve party. He came in the door dressed in black. Raven always dressed in black, but he almost glowed, like he had his own invisible spotlight shining on his head. I told myself, before the night is over, I have got to meet that man. An audacious commitment for a guy as painfully shy as I was. I needn't worry. A few minutes later, I felt a hand on my knee, and there he was beside me. He looked deep in my eyes and said, "My name's Raven Wolfdancer. I don't want to seem like I'm trying to pick you up, but I am." I said, "My name's Bruce Tidwell, and that's all right, because I kind of hoped you would." We spent the evening chatting. I accepted an invitation to dinner the next Friday. I thought we'd eat, we'd chat. I might kiss him goodnight at the end of the evening. Actually, I knew I was going to kiss him goodnight at the end of the evening. I didn't expect him to take me into his bed, but my morals have always been well-intentioned, if not exactly strong. When the time came, my mind exploded into a million shards of glass that flew out to the edge of the universe and slammed back into my head, and I wondered why the windows hadn't shattered, why there should be sirens in the distance, dogs barking down the street. The neighbors should be knocking on the door to ask if we were okay. But the silence was only broken by the sound of our breathing. I smiled to myself and thought, so that's what sex is. I was 27 and Raven was 42, but I wanted to spend my life with him. 2 years later, though, I discovered the leather bar on the sketchy side of town. He told me I was too young to get married, that he couldn't go there with me, but that I needed to go and find out what it meant. We held each other and cried and stayed good friends. But I put on my biker jacket and my new leather boots. I went off to the Eagle. I met my first leather daddy while I was two-stepping at the Cove. Well, I was two-stepping. He was stalking me. He stepped out in front of me on my way to the bar so that I would run into him. I was apologizing, and he said, "No, it's okay. Can I buy you a drink to make up for it?" I said, "Another drink? It was my fault, and you hadn't bought me a first drink yet." He said, "Okay, if you insist, I'll buy you 2 drinks, but we'd better get started." 5 minutes later, my beer almost untouched, I was sitting on his lap, French kissing him. How did that happen? Sometime later, throwing caution to the wind, I was on the back of his motorbike, going out for coffee, trying to find something to say. I complimented the emerald stud in his ear and admitted that I was too chicken to get my ear pierced. He asked if I'd been to the Eagle, though I'm sure he'd already seen me there. I said I had. He said, "Let's go." Back on the bike off to the bar, but we walk in and he walks straight to the back where the leather shop was, me tagging along behind him. We step through the door, he calls out, "Hey, Carrie, my boy wants his ear pierced." My boy, his boy junk, claimed and collared, just like that. That's how it was done back then. Later, when my ear healed, he put the emerald stud out of his and put it into mine. A year later, he got hit by a car on his bike. He rolled 30 feet down Highland Avenue. He was in the hospital for 6 weeks. It was a year before he was getting around with the cane he would need for the rest of his life. I stayed with him. I took care of him. I never asked how much the insurance paid out. A lot, I'm sure. He had property in the mountains. He was going to build a cabin, build kiddie playhouses, and breed Abyssinian cats. He begged me to come, but I had to let him go. I knew I couldn't live my life in the shadow of his fear, but Daddy Al taught me what devotion is. I met Frank through an ad in a personal column. I used a friend's P.O. box. He called and said I had a letter. I went straight to my car. I opened the envelope. Frank's photo was upside down. I handed it to my friend and asked if he was cute while I started to read. He was. We dated 3 months, which was not near long enough. We would end up together for 12 years, although it should have been 5. His family loved me as much as mine loved him. We lived the American dream with a split-level house, fine china and crystal at our dinner parties. Life was beautiful, even as we slowly drifted apart, and I didn't know how to say, "I'm not happy anymore." I stayed because after those 3 months of dating, he invited me to spend the week after Christmas with him to see if we could live together. Halfway through the week, my mother called. I was working at a call center doing public opinion surveys and giving people $50 to come over and eat a hamburger. I was the closer. I could always get the last recruit when the chips were down. I didn't know how much that cost me. My mother wanted to tell me that my supervisor called. A new survey was starting in January. Would I be there? Of course I will. Be sure you call her. Yes, Mama, I'll call her. I hung up the phone. Then I fell over on the bed, rolled up into a little ball, whimpering, "I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. I can't." Part of me was standing beside the bed saying, "This is not good. You got to get your shit together. Frank is going to come up here to see where you've gone. He'll find out what kind of a nutcake you are and send you packing. But I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it." He came upstairs. He sat on the edge of the bed. He asked what was wrong, and I told him between sobs. He said, "You're not going back there. My boy will never hurt like this. Just take a deep breath and know whatever happens, you will not do that ever again." I started to calm down, and he asked if I needed to be alone for a while, or should he stay? And I said, "Please lay down here and hold me." He spooned up against me, put his arms around me, squeezed me tight. And I thought, this is what it means to be married. A year before I finally left Frank, I went to the International Mr. Leather weekend and met Mike. We fit together like 2 puzzle pieces. He said I was the best boy he'd ever met. We spent 4 amazing days together, and then he asked me to come back to California. But he was married and had 2 teenage kids. He promised me he had his own apartment, and he and his wife were already agreed to a divorce as soon as the kids aged out of the considerable family benefits from his government job. I couldn't leave everything I knew behind and move across the country for a man I'd barely even met. But I knew I had to have my own life back. I went home, told Frank that I couldn't even remember the last time he kissed me. He promised things would change, but they didn't. I gave him a year before I left. By the time I was ready to say fuck it and point my car towards the West Coast, Mike had found another boy. Several years later, they were coming through town. He called and asked if I was free for lunch. He wanted his boy to meet the best leather boy in America. I knew when I left Frank, he might not have another chance, but being alone is better than living in a gilded cage. Mike taught me that looking back at the road not taken is really a wish for suicide. Maybe we would have been wonderful together, maybe a disaster, but the one thing that is certain is that I would not be the man that I am today. My life has been good, better than many, if not most. And maybe there's a lesson still to learn yet.